Good morning. Would you please introduce yourself and describe your current leadership role?
Yes, so hello, my name is Cole MacCollister, and I am a residential community educator with Housing and Residential Life at Oklahoma State University.
Go Pokes.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Cole, would you please describe your current management style in one sentence?
I would say learning from mistakes while lifting and climbing. Pretty much like I've been here almost a year, so April will be a year. And in my role, it's been a lot of let's make mistakes, let's just try this and see if it works. And as I'm new, there's newer people than me. And so it's me making mistakes and modeling, okay, whenever you make a mistake, how do you pivot from it? How do you do better? And how do you learn from the mistake? And so that's what I try to exemplify for the people I supervise.
Do you think you have a consistent management style between different staff members, or do you think you adjust depending on the person?
Mm. It really varies. I would say the core of what I do is stays the same, like my values. Um, I I definitely care about my people as people. We talk about in Res Life, with our students, your academics are first, and then your assistantship. Um, and Angelia in our meeting yesterday made a really good point of family emergency is up there with it. I think
Yeah.
the same thing. I think that our students and our, employees, they're people outside of this role. So yes, I need to hold them accountable. There needs to be a blanket accountability because otherwise, what are we doing? But we're people. We have lives outside of the role, and I recognize that. And so if there's flexibility that can be excuse me, if there's flexibility that can be offered and the job will still get done, why not do it? Especially if it's gonna help my student, reach their goal in their way that would best fit them.
Um, how has your leadership style or strategy evolved over the years? And how do you can see like that style growing as you go forward?
Yeah. Um, Definitely has grown. I started supervising in 2021, so whenever I started graduate school, very different now from, I say very different. I would say my comfort level is very different.
Yeah.
Um, Starting off, Emily, I would have one-on-ones, loved them, but I was terrified. I was like, oh, what do I talk about? How do I guide a student? Like, what is going on? Um, and then I had the layer of I was young, and so I was around the same age as my students, and so it was how do I maintain that professional boundary but still establish rapport, but don't let them think I'm just a 22-year-old that doesn't know
Yeah.
what I'm doing, so all those kind of factors coming in. I think a core value of my leadership style and supervision style is autonomy and
Mhm.
individualization.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, for example, this past semester, I let my ARCEs, definitely did not let them sink. That is not the right word. But I very much said, you're over your building. Let's see what you got to do. Of course, a communication was established. I said, if you have a question, come to me. They weren't alone, but it was very much, let's see what this role is like. Let's see how you interact with the role, and I'll support you in that. And so it's really come to fruition. I've had some staff members who really rose to the occasion and they're doing the job really well now, versus I have some other students who now I know this semester, okay, you need a little bit more hands-on. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you didn't do a good job. It just means that wasn't your learning style. And I think as I continue to grow and continue to get more experience, I'm learning situations where I need to let them kind of sink or swim, quote unquote, and
Yeah.
where I can let them shine. And I think I'm getting better at identifying that. Like, I don't think I threw any grads into the deep water this past semester. In the past, I have. So I've had to learn from those experiences, and recognize what my role is as a supervisor to not do their job for them, but to also make them feel empowered to do their job.
Yeah. You were talking about like when you were like, yeah, when you were younger, like for your first couple like roles.
Yeah.
How did you kind of like navigate the situations when you were like tasked with managing like people like around your age or like maybe even a former coworker? And how do you like approach, what's your approach like for those new relationships?
Yeah. Um, so it kind of goes back to that individualization thing. I kind of learned with at the time I was supervising RAs, so I was in a very similar position as you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had to individualize my supervision style. First and foremost, I was honest with my students. I was like, listen, I'm 22. This is my first time. We're going to learn together. And I think what I've learned is students want to know the why. So why doesn't Cole know how to do X, Y, and Z? Well, Cole's 22 and he just started graduate school, you know? So just being realistic. But also showing my competency with them. So saying, yes, I'm young. Yes, I'm in this role, but I'm also competent. There's a reason I was hired for this role. Um, and so that individualization piece, whenever I had one-on-ones with my students, I could tell which students that I would have a really good rapport with and doing the job wouldn't be an issue and I'd get to know them personally. And then there were others that we didn't vibe and they just wanted to do their job. And I had to learn that I see people as individual in their roles at work and other people just see work as work, which is perfectly fine. And I've had to adjust my supervision style to meet that. Um, And so while I think I always think of one specific RA who did not want to talk about personal things, didn't want to get to know me. But I still remember her because I remember every meeting she was on top of her responsibilities. She had everything turned in. She did her job, and her supervision style was she just needed accountability. She didn't need the quote unquote fluff. Um, and so I kind of had to pivot and change my supervision style from let's empower people to, okay, this person just wants to do their job. So how do I support them in their job?
Yeah. Branching off of that, like when you first started, you might have kind of answered this. When you first start in like different roles, like when you first started as an RCE or maybe started as whatever the grad was at your
Yeah,
previous
yeah,
institution, how do you approach building trust and establishing credibility with your team?
yeah. So again, it's the competency thing. Um, Mistakes I made when I first started supervising was I would have one-on-ones. We'd have great conversations, but then I wouldn't take any notes after.
Mm-hmm.
So a week would pass. We would have a one-on-one. And I remember like, we talked about this movie and we talked about this book we read. And then they say, hey, Cole, what about this resident that I told you about last week? Did you follow up? And then I'm sitting there, deer in the headlights, like, oh, I didn't. Um, so that's kind of that's a big one that I've noticed. So that credibility piece, you got to be competent in your role. If you are supervising people and you expect them to do what you're asking them to do, you got to follow up. You got to make sure that you're giving them the tools they need to be successful. Um, Otherwise, they're going to look at you as their leader, and say, "My leader isn't doing anything. Why should I?" It's not, uh, I guess, not encouraging, but inspiring for students to see someone who's just in a role because they can tell when someone's just working the job and when someone's passionate about the role. Um, and that shows through their output and through their interactions with students.
How do you I'm sure maybe Cole, this has never happened to you, but how do you handle situations where a team member like disagrees with your feedback or like a decision you made?
Yeah. Um, so I'm pretty proactive with that kind of thing. I, as you probably have guessed, I'm pretty relationship oriented. I think there's great power in knowing someone, because if you receive an email from someone that you know versus this random person in the university, your response to that email is going to be inclined, based on your relationship. Um, I don't know if I can think of a specific example, um, but I know there have been times like there was an instance where someone accused me of leaving them out to dry over the weekend. Something about a checkout, the resident didn't know who to go to, or so the office manager was calling me on a Saturday. Long story short, I had a conversation with the office manager and I said, I'm sorry that you didn't feel supported. and I don't work on the weekends. So let's figure out how you can be supported on the weekends and how my full-time, because I'd stepped into a full-time role at that point. I said, how can I protect my full-time role because I'm already spread thin? And what's really cool about that situation is about half an hour or half a semester later, we had a meeting, like a departmental thing, and we went around in a circle and was like, compliment somebody in this circle for something that they do in their role. And that office manager had me. So I was sitting there like, oh goodness, this is going to be interesting. But what she said was she appreciated how calm I could be in a tense conversation and that she appreciates how I was able to kind of bring down the stress and the anxiety in the conversation and just make it very real, which I appreciated because when I left that conversation with her, I was in my head, my perspective, I'm like, well, guess I got my enemy. Like, I guess I tried my best, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But it was really fulfilling, I guess, to see that I had taken the high road and I had been relationship oriented and it had paid off.
Awesome. My last question for you today is just kind of a general like reflection, kind of like what traits have you admired in your past supervisors or current supervisors, and how have other supervisors you've had shaped your leadership?
I would say I've kind of had the Goldilocks experience of supervisors. Um, I started off, my very first supervisor was very, this is what you do, and this is how you do your job, which I always talk about it as boot camp. I went to boot camp. It really, it was stressful, but it was also the supervision style that I received. It made me work at such a level of competency, I guess, that became my standard. And so whenever I had a new supervisor who was on the Goldilocks thing, very hands off, I was like, oh, I know what to do because I've been doing my job. And then, of course, I had the just right supervisor who was that challenge and support. So it was really perfect. And he's still my mentor today. Um, so really the good and the bad traits have helped. Having a micromanager as a supervisor helped me grow. It
Yeah.
helped me defend my time. It helped me defend my work because why are you worried about my work? If I'm hired to do this job, please let me do my job. Um, the supervisor that gave me a lot of autonomy gave me too much autonomy, but it also taught me like, ooh, I'm a person who needs structure. As a person, an employee, I need a supervisor who will tell me, not micromanage me, but say, hey, this is due by this day. You go, okay, you got this. But then, yeah, so whenever I got the just right supervisor, that's when I really saw like, oh, I can be supported and challenged at the same time. But a value between all three, which I have no doubt about, is they all cared about me. If
Mm.
they didn't care, they wouldn't supervise the way that they did. It was very much they cared about my trajectory, both as an undergrad. Um, those three experiences were in my undergrad, I guess I should share. So they really affected how I view supervision. And so whenever I went to graduate school and I did not have a supervisor for a year and 6 months, I was okay, which not ideal. You should have a supervisor, but it was a type of dysfunction that I'd grown, that built the resilience to
Yeah.
navigate. Um, that I think a lot of people in my similar role wouldn't have lasted as long. And not to say that to toot my own horn, I think I should have left earlier in that other role. But
Yay.
you know, I think it really like it has prepared me. I mean, I throw it back to boot camp. Like you go through this strenuous thing or relating it to education, you go through training and you go through these deep things to learn the foundations of your role. I feel like I have my foundation now because of those values and the supervisors that have poured into me, held me accountable, and how they've made mistakes and how I've learned from their mistakes.
That's really awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate getting to talk to you and sit down and talk about this.
Yeah, pleasure.